A call that changed everything. Ayesha Mercedes never thought much about religion. She had always considered herself an atheist, or at most someone who believed in a higher power, but had no real connection to it. But life has a strange way of pulling us toward the truth when we least expect it. One ordinary day, Ayesha's phone rang. The voice on the other end was urgent. "You need to come to your father's flat," they said. Her heart pounded. Something felt off. When she arrived, she saw police tape stretched across the entrance. Officers stood at the doorway, blocking entry. Confused and anxious, she tried to push past them. "That's my father's place," she said. "Let me in." One of the officers shook his head. Then her phone buzzed again. It was her father's number. She quickly picked it up. "Dad?" she whispered, but the voice on the other end wasn't his. "We have your father's phone," the man said. "He's been stabbed 8 times. Ayesha's breath caught in her throat. Everything around her blurred. Her father attacked, stabbed 8 times. She could barely register the words. It felt like the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. She later learned that her father had been the victim of a brutal robbery. The attackers broke into his flat, demanding money. When he refused, they showed no mercy. They stabbed him in the arm, then in the leg 3-4 times, and then straight in the heart. As Ayesha rushed to the hospital, she could barely breathe. Would he survive? She didn't know it yet, but this horrifying moment would be the first step on a journey that would change her life forever. A childhood without faith growing up, Ayesha had never been religious. Her father had no interest in faith, and while her grandmother had statues of Mary in her home, religion was never a serious topic in their family. At one point, Ayesha identified as Christian, but only because it was expected. She never truly believed. In fact, one thing about Christianity always troubled her. If God is all-powerful, she wondered, why would he need a son? Why would he need someone to suffer for our sins? Whenever she asked, she was either ignored or told, "You're not supposed to question these things." But she couldn't ignore the doubts in her heart. And so, she drifted away from religion completely. A life of struggle. Ayesha's life was anything but easy. Growing up as a mixed-race girl in a predominantly white area, she was always the outsider. She faced racism at school. People mocked her accent, the way she looked. She felt like she didn't belong anywhere. By the time she was a teenager, she had fallen in with the wrong crowd. She became part of the UK's rap community, spending time with people who lived a fast-paced, reckless lifestyle. Yet deep down, she was still searching for something. And then something unexpected happened. One of her friends, a rapper she worked with, started talking to her about Islam. At first, she wasn't interested, but then he said something that shook her. "You know," he told her, "we've had this conversation before." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You asked me about Islam once," he said, "but back then, you weren't ready to listen." That statement haunted her. Had she heard the truth before? Had she ignored it? Was Allah trying to reach her all along? A night of desperation. But it wasn't until that terrifying night at the hospital that everything changed. Ayesha sat beside her father's hospital bed, staring at the machines keeping him alive. The doctors had almost missed it, the stab wound in his heart. If they hadn't checked, he would have bled out and died. The thought of losing him broke her. That night, alone in her room, she couldn't stop crying. And then she remembered something. A voice from her past. A shopkeeper she had once known. A kind old man she used to call uncle. "If you ever feel lost," he had told her, "ask Allah. He can do anything." Ayesha had never prayed before. She didn't even know who Allah was. But in that moment, she was desperate. So she closed her eyes and whispered, Allah, if you're real, take this pain away. And then something incredible happened. A warmth spread through her body, starting from her feet and rising upward. It was a sensation she had never felt before, comforting, calming. Her heart, once heavy with sorrow, felt light. It was as if someone had whispered, "Don't worry, I am here." That was the first time Ayesha truly prayed. And for the first time, she felt like someone was listening. The path to Islam. From that moment, Ayesha knew she had to learn more. A few days later, she met her Muslim friend again. He took her to East London, where Islamic shops lined the streets. He handed her a hijab. "Try it," he said. She slipped it on and looked at herself in the mirror. "This feels different," she whispered. Something inside her clicked. Later that night, as they drove past a mosque, her friend turned to her. "If you want," he said, "we can go inside and you can take your shahada. Or if you're not ready, we can wait." Ayesha thought for a moment, then she nodded. "I want to go in." Inside the mosque, she felt out of place. People stared, her tight clothing standing out among the modestly dressed women. But she didn't care. She sat down, listened to the imam. And when the moment came, she spoke the words that would change her life forever. "Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu." Tears streamed down her face. She felt lighter, free. For the first time in her life, she had found home. A new beginning, adjusting to a new way of life wasn't easy. Learning to pray, wearing the hijab, leaving behind old habits, it was a struggle. But the peace she found in Islam was unlike anything she had ever known. Many of her friends were shocked. She had been the last person anyone expected to become Muslim. But for Ayesha, there was no doubt. She had spent her whole life searching for something. And now, she had found it. A message for those still searching. To those who are still lost, still questioning, Ayesha has one message. Give Islam a chance. I wasn't looking for it, but it found me. And when I finally opened my heart, I found the truth. And maybe you will too.